My name is Zora, and I am 32 years old. Exactly 1 year after my highly publicized divorce, my former mother-in-law spotted me at the hospital. With a smug, triumphant smile, she looked me up and down and said, "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. Look at him now. Marcus finally has a son to carry on the family legacy, and he had him with your best friend." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I simply took a sip of my coffee, smiled back at her, and asked, "Is that what you really believe, Vivian?" 3 minutes later, a man walked into that room and the color completely drained from her face. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see how they all came to regret their actions. The air in the VIP maternity ward of Atlanta General smelled of expensive antiseptic and fresh lilies. I was walking down the quiet marble-floored corridor checking emails on my phone when a figure stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop abruptly. It was Vivian. She was draped in a massive chinchilla coat that looked completely ridiculous for the mild Georgia weather, clutching her quilted designer bag like a shield against the commoners. "Well, well, well," Vivian drawled, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet condescension. "I think you are lost, Zora. The public waiting room is down on the first floor. This is the VIP wing. It is reserved for actual families, not girls from South Atlanta looking for a handout." I slowly lowered my phone and met her gaze. She had not changed a single bit. Her posture still radiated the arrogant belief that her bloodline made her inherently superior to everyone else in the building. She expected me to shrink to look down at my shoes, to apologize for breathing the same high-end oxygen as her. That was the dynamic she had established when I was married to her son Marcus. But I was not that exhausted, financially drained 25-year-old girl anymore. "I am exactly where I need to be, Vivian," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and entirely unbothered. "Now, if you do not mind, you are blocking my path. I have business to attend to." "Business," she scoffed, letting out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed down the quiet hallway. "What kind of business could you possibly have up here? Are you planning events again? Decorating balloon arches for rich people? You really should know your place, Zora. You do not belong here. You never belonged with us." My son finally realized that a girl with no pedigree and an empty bank account could never uphold the family name. She leaned in closer, her expensive floral perfume failing to mask the bitterness in her tone. "It is actually pathetic that you are lingering around here today of all days. Did you hear the news and come begging for another chance? Marcus is a father now. Chloe just delivered a beautiful, healthy baby boy. A true heir. Chloe, your former best friend. She is the kind of woman Marcus always deserved, someone with class, someone with the right background. Not a gold digger who tricked him into marriage." I stood there letting her vile words wash over me without absorbing a single drop. 2 years ago, those words would have broken me. 2 years ago, I would have remembered standing on her massive wrap-around porch, shivering in the December cold, bleeding and terrified while she looked out the window and refused to unlock the door. She had told Marcus I was overreacting to a simple cramp. By the time I drove myself to the emergency room, it was too late. I lost my baby that night, and she used it as proof that my body was not fit to carry the prestigious Pierce bloodline. But standing there in the pristine corridor of Atlanta General, I felt absolutely no sting from her venom. The woman glaring at me was not a formidable matriarch. She was a desperate, petty illusionist clutching at straws. I held my ground, meeting her furious gaze with a profound, unshakable calm. I stepped to the side, intending to walk past her, but she aggressively shifted to block me again. Her face flushed with sudden anger, the veins in her neck straining against her pearl choker. "Do not you dare walk away when I am speaking to you," she hissed, dropping all pretense of Southern charm. "You still have that same disrespectful attitude from the night you knelt in the freezing rain, begging me to open the front door. You looked absolutely pathetic that night, Zora. Almost as pathetic as that ruined pregnancy you could not even manage to carry to term." I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "And you are still carrying that vintage Birkin bag I bought for you 3 years ago," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. I must say, Vivian, the standards for the Jack and Jill Society wives must be slipping if they are letting you parade around with last season's charity gifts. I wonder what your country club friends would say if they knew your credit cards are maxed out and you are wearing a fur coat you cannot even afford to put in cold storage. Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her chest in mock horror. How dare you speak to me like that? She sputtered, her voice trembling with indignation. You know nothing about our finances. We are the Pierce family. We built this city. You are nothing but trash we tried to clean up. Before she could formulate another insult, the heavy wooden door of the nearest VIP suite clicked open. Out stepped Chloe, cradling a newborn, wrapped in an impossibly expensive cashmere blanket. Chloe had been my college roommate. We shared late-night study sessions, cheap pizza, and dreams of taking over the city. I trusted her implicitly. I was the one who introduced her to Marcus. I was the one who invited her to our family dinners when she complained about feeling lonely. I did not know she was spending those dinners studying the expensive artwork on the walls and calculating how quickly she could replace me. Now here she was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet I recognized from Marcus's family vault, performing the role of the fragile, exhausted mother to a T. Chloe froze when she saw me standing in the hallway with her mother-in-law. Her pale face contorted into a mask of pure victimhood, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. Zora. What are you doing here? Chloe asked, her voice trembling perfectly. Please do not cause a scene today. We just want peace. This baby is a blessing from God for the Pierce family. You have to stop obsessing over us and let Marcus be happy. She clutched the baby closer to her chest, acting as though my mere presence was a physical threat to her stolen happiness. Vivian immediately rushed to her side, placing a protective arm around Chloe's shoulders. You heard her, Vivian snapped, glaring at me. You need to leave before I have security drag you out. This child is the true Pierce heir, something you could never provide. You are a bitter, jealous woman who is stalking the halls of this hospital because you cannot stand to see my son happy with a woman who actually can give him a family. Chloe, you have spent your entire life playing the victim whenever you are caught red-handed, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. Do not pretend you want peace when you spent 2 years actively destroying my marriage to secure a trust fund that does not even exist anymore. You wanted the Pierce family legacy so badly. Well, congratulations, you have it. But I highly suggest you stop crying and start paying attention to what is actually happening around you. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that seemed to infuriate them both even more. Is that right? I asked, turning my attention back to my former mother-in-law. Well, by all means, Vivian, call security. In fact, I encourage you to do so. I would love to see how that plays out for you. She stared at me momentarily, thrown off balance by my complete lack of fear. She had expected the old Zora, the girl who would shrink, apologize, and retreat in tears just to keep the peace. The girl who desperately craved a mother figure and tried endlessly to earn her approval. She did not know that the old Zora died the day Marcus handed me divorce papers and told me I was a bad investment. The woman standing before her now had forged an empire out of the ashes they left behind. You are bluffing! Vivian sneered, pulling her phone from her purse with trembling fingers. You always were a pathetic liar. I am going to have you thrown out on the street, and I will make sure everyone in our circle knows exactly how unhinged you have become. I checked the gold watch on my wrist, noting the time. It was almost perfectly aligned with my schedule. I looked back up at her, my expression completely impassive. Make the call, Vivian. But make it fast, because my business here is about to begin, and you are standing directly in the crossfire. The automated glass doors at the end of the hallway slid open with a soft chime. Silas walked through them, moving with the kind of effortless authority that commanded immediate respect. He was 38 years old, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit and holding a thick medical file stamped with the hospital's official red seal. Silas was not just the man I was going to marry. He was the chief legal counsel for the entire medical conglomerate, a man known throughout Atlanta for his razor-sharp intellect and ruthless corporate takeovers. He walked straight toward me, completely ignoring the two women clutching each other in the hallway. He leaned down, pressed a soft kiss to my cheek, and handed me the file. Vivian's confident sneer vanished the second she recognized the gold hospital insignia pinned to the lapel of Silas's suit. Her eyes darted from his badge to the sealed medical file in my hands, and for the first time that morning, I saw true, genuine panic flash across her face. Silas did not even grant Vivian the courtesy of a greeting. He stood tall beside me, an immovable force radiating pure authority. He simply adjusted his cuffs and looked down at the two women as if they were a minor administrative error he was about to correct. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She stared at the gold insignia on Silas' suit, the very badge that signified absolute legal control over Atlanta General. Her gaze shifted frantically between Silas and the sealed medical file I was now holding. "Excuse me." Vivian finally managed her voice trembling as she tried to summon her usual haughty demeanor. "I do not care who you are or what badge you are wearing. This is a private medical wing. You are violating federal privacy laws just by standing here holding those documents. I will have your license revoked, and I will see you both in court." Silas let out a low, amused chuckle. He did not look at Vivian. He looked at me. "The acquisition went through smoothly, Zora," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "Your first order of business as the new majority shareholder is ready for review." Vivian froze. Chloe stopped breathing. The silence in the hallway was so absolute, you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Silas reached over and casually flipped open the heavy manila folder in my hands. He did not rush. He let the agonizing suspense stretch out while Chloe visibly shook. "Let us review the basic biology of the Pierce family legacy," Silas said, his tone dripping with clinical detachment. "According to the hospital records, Marcus Pierce has type AB blood. You, Chloe, have type A blood. But the beautiful, healthy baby boy resting in your arms right now has type O blood." Silas paused, letting the heavy weight of science settle over the corridor. He looked directly into Vivian's widening eyes. "I am no geneticist," he continued, his voice echoing down the pristine hallway. "But the laws of biology are remarkably uncompromising. A father with type AB blood cannot under any circumstances produce a child with type O blood. Legally and biologically speaking, your son is not the father of that child. Your precious Pierce bloodline ends right there in that blanket." The designer diaper bag slipped from Chloe's shoulder and hit the marble floor with a heavy thud. She stumbled backward, clutching the baby as if Silas had just physically struck her. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost trapped in expensive cashmere. Vivian staggered, her hand flying out to grip the wall for support. "No," she gasped, her voice a hollow rasp. "No, that is a lie. That is a fabricated lie. You printed that yourself to destroy us." Chloe immediately burst into hysterical sobs. The tears flowed instantly, washing away her perfectly applied makeup. She squeezed her eyes shut and started shaking her head violently. "It is a mistake," Chloe cried, her voice piercing the quiet corridor. "The hospital machines are wrong. They mixed up the blood samples. Zora paid him to print this. She is just a bitter, barren woman trying to ruin the happiest day of my life because she could never give Marcus a child." I looked at my former best friend, watching her play the exact same card she always played. The fragile, innocent victim crushed by the big, angry world. "You are crying the exact same crocodile tears you cried 2 years ago, Chloe," I said, my voice slicing through her hysterics like cold steel. "Do you remember that day? You sat on my couch sobbing into your hands, telling Marcus your brother was going to lose his house if you did not get a loan. You cried just like this until Marcus secretly co-signed that massive debt for you. You manipulated my husband right in front of my face. You really think I am going to buy this pathetic performance now? The machines do not lie, Chloe. You do." "What the hell is going on out here?" The loud, angry voice boomed from the other end of the hallway. Marcus was storming toward us. He wore a designer polo shirt and his signature arrogant stride, but the confusion on his face betrayed him. He looked from his mother leaning weakly against the wall to his new wife sobbing hysterically, clutching the baby. "Marcus," Chloe wailed, throwing herself toward him the moment he was within reach. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "Zora is trying to ruin everything. She brought this man here with fake medical records. She paid them to say the baby is not yours. She is trying to break our family apart because she is jealous. Marcus wrapped his arms around Chloe, holding her tight. His eyes locked onto me, burning with sudden, furious indignation. He puffed out his chest, trying to play the heroic protector. "Are you out of your mind?" Zora Marcus yelled, his voice echoing loudly. "Is this how low you have sunk? You are so obsessed with my happiness that you are forging medical documents. You are a sick, bitter woman. I should have known you would pull some ghetto trash stunt like this. You could not give me a son, so you want to take mine away." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the man I had spent 5 years supporting, the man whose debts I had paid, whose fragile ego I had constantly massaged. "You would rather believe her tears than a certified medical document?" I asked, my tone completely flat. "I suppose that makes sense, Marcus. You always preferred convenient lies over hard truths. You believed her when she said I fell down the stairs on purpose to terminate my pregnancy. You believed her because looking at the security footage and seeing her push me would have ruined your perfect little fantasy. You are exactly the fool she needed you to be." Marcus' face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He let go of Chloe and took a threatening step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. Silas smoothly stepped forward, blocking Marcus' path completely. Silas was taller, broader, and utterly unbothered by Marcus' aggressive posturing. "Take one more step toward my fiancé," Silas warned, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register, "and I will personally ensure you leave this hospital in zip ties." Fiancé Vivian shrieked, finding her voice again. She pushed herself off the wall, pointing a shaking finger at Silas. "You are engaged to this piece of trash. That explains everything. This is a coordinated attack. You are both trespassing and harassing my family." Vivian turned wildly, looking down the hallway. "Security!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, completely abandoning her high society decorum. "Security! Get up here right now! Arrest these people! They are harassing my family!" Down the hallway, the elevator doors dinged open. The chief of medicine, Dr. Harrison, marched out, flanked by 4 burly security guards in dark uniforms. Vivian's face lit up with triumphant relief. She waved her arms frantically, directing them toward us. "Dr. Harrison, thank God," Vivian cried out, adjusting her chinchilla coat and standing tall. "Have these 2 removed immediately. They are forging hospital documents and harassing my daughter-in-law. I want them banned from the premises, and I want a full public apology from the hospital administration for letting this happen." Marcus smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. "You are done, Zora," he sneered. "You thought you could walk in here and play games. You are about to get escorted out like the garbage you are." Dr. Harrison approached the group. He was sweating slightly, his eyes darting nervously. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at Marcus. He walked straight past the Pierce family, stopped directly in front of me, and bowed his head respectfully. "Miss Zora." Dr. Harrison said, his voice trembling slightly. "I apologize profusely for the disturbance. The board has finalized the paperwork, and your acquisition of the Atlanta General Network is complete. The security team is entirely at your disposal. How would you like me to handle these individuals?" The silence that fell over the hallway this time was deafening. Marcus' arms dropped to his sides, his jaw hanging open in pure, unfiltered shock. Chloe stopped crying instantly, her tears drying up as she stared at the chief of medicine in total disbelief. Vivian looked like she had just been struck by lightning. She shook her head, stepping forward with her hands raised. "Dr. Harrison, what are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Acquisition? What acquisition? She is an event planner. She has no money." I smiled slowly, looking at the 3 people who had made it their life mission to destroy me. "I suppose you missed the Forbes article last month, Vivian," I said, my voice ringing crystal clear in the quiet corridor. I did not just plan events. I built a private equity firm that connects venture capitalists with distressed assets. My firm, Black Diamond Vanguard, just purchased this entire hospital network for $150 million in cash. I stepped closer to Vivian, watching her eyes wide with terror as my words finally sank in. The VIP wing you are standing in right now. I continued my gaze sweeping over Marcus and Chloe before locking back onto Vivian. I own it. The floor beneath your fake designer shoes. I own it. And the security guards you just screamed for. They work for me. Marcus shook his head, backing away slowly. No, he muttered, running a hand over his face. No, that is impossible. You took nothing in the divorce. You left with nothing. I left with nothing because I refused to touch the filthy scraps of your family trust, Marcus. I replied, turning to face him. I let you keep your illusion of wealth because I knew what was actually hiding in your financial statements. You want to talk about reality? Let us talk about your reality. I nodded to Silas. He pulled a slim tablet from his briefcase, tapped the screen, and held it up. The crisp, clear sound of a recorded phone call filled the hallway. It was Marcus' voice cracking with desperation, begging a private lender for an extension on a massive high-interest loan. In the recording, Marcus was crying, promising that his mother would never find out, and swearing he would pay back every dime. Silas tapped the screen, stopping the audio. He looked at Marcus with cold amusement. You have been entirely bankrupt for 2 years, Marcus Silas stated clearly. When Zora walked away from the divorce settlement, you took the money you hoarded and poured it all into a fraudulent cryptocurrency venture run by Chloe Brother. You lost every single penny of the Pierce Family Trust Fund. Vivian let out a horrified gasp, spinning around to stare at her son. Marcus, what is he talking about? Vivian shrieked, grabbing Marcus by the arm. Tell me he is lying. Tell me the trust is safe. Marcus could not look at his mother. He stared at the floor, his entire body shaking with shame and defeat. He had nothing left to say. His perfect facade was shattered, his wealth was gone, and the child he thought would secure his legacy did not even share his blood. Chloe, sensing the total collapse of the Pierce empire, backed away toward the wall, clutching the baby tighter. She looked at Vivian like a trapped animal, her innocent mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. You think I wanted to be here? Chloe suddenly snapped, her voice shrill and defensive. You think I actually wanted to tie myself to this sinking ship? Vivian turned her rage onto Chloe, her eyes burning with a sudden ferocious hatred. You little tramp! Vivian screamed, lunging toward her daughter-in-law. You tricked my son. You brought another man-child into my family. Chloe dodged Vivian, grasping hands, her own face twisting with disgust. Do not touch me, you washed-up old hag! Chloe yelled back, stepping safely behind one of my security guards. You have no money. Your son is a spineless loser who lost everything. The baby daddy is my personal trainer, and he is twice the man Marcus will ever be. You people are a pathetic joke. I only stayed because I needed Marcus to pay off my brother debt. The sound of Vivian slapping Chloe echoed sharply off the marble walls. Chloe screamed, stumbling backward and almost dropping the child. In an instant, the two women who had bonded over their shared hatred of me were tearing each other apart right in the middle of my hospital corridor. Vivian grabbed a handful of Chloe's blonde hair, yanking her downward, while Chloe shrieked and kicked out wildly. Marcus fell to his knees on the floor, completely broken, unable to even raise his voice to stop them. He sat there sobbing into his hands as his mother and his wife destroyed the last shreds of his dignity. I stood watching the chaos unfold, feeling nothing but absolute peace. I turned to Dr. Harrison, who was staring at the brawl in horror. Dr. Harrison, I said, my voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the sounds of screaming and crying. Please have security escort these people off my property. They are disturbing the patients. Yes, Miss Zora. Dr. Harrison responded instantly, snapping his fingers at the guards. As the guards moved in to pull Vivian and Chloe apart, separating the tangled mess of expensive coats and cheap lies, I turned my back on them. Silas offered me his arm, and I took it, resting my hand lightly against his sleeve. We walked together down the pristine hallway, leaving the screaming, the crying, and the shattered Pierce legacy far behind us. They had thrown me to the wolves, expecting me to die. They did not realize I would come back leading the pack. Vivian's eyes were practically bulging out of her head as she stared at the gold badge pinned to Silas. She knew exactly what that insignia meant. It was the mark of the hospital's executive board. Her mouth opened and closed silently, her previous bravado completely evaporating under Silas's cold, calculating gaze. I believe you were just threatening to call security? Vivian? Silas said, his voice entirely too calm for the absolute destruction he was about to unleash. Please go right ahead. But before you make a fool of yourself, you might want to look at what is inside this file. It concerns a severe discrepancy in the neonatal ward's screening protocols, a discrepancy involving your new grandson. Chloe let out a sharp gasp. She pulled the baby tighter against her chest, her knuckles turning white. What are you talking about? Chloe demanded, her voice pitching up into a shrill defensive whine. There is no discrepancy. My baby is perfect. Zora put you up to this. She paid you to come here and harass us. Silas ignored Chloe entirely. He did not entertain tantrums from women who built their lives on deceit. He simply flipped open the heavy manila folder. The sound of the crisp paper turning echoed like a gunshot in the silent corridor. Let us review the basic biology of the Pierce family legacy, Silas stated, his tone dripping with clinical detachment. According to the official hospital records drawn less than an hour ago, Marcus Pierce has blood type AB. You, Chloe, have blood type O. But the beautiful, healthy baby boy resting in your arms right now also has blood type O. Silas paused, letting the heavy weight of science settle over the women. He looked directly into Vivian's widening, terrified eyes. I am no geneticist, he continued, but the laws of biology are remarkably uncompromising. A father with type AB blood cannot under any circumstances produce a child with type O blood. Legally and biologically speaking, your son is not the father of that child. Your precious Pierce bloodline ends right there in that cashmere blanket. The designer diaper bag slipped from Chloe's shoulder and hit the marble floor with a heavy thud. She stumbled backward, clutching the baby as if Silas had just physically struck her. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost trapped in expensive clothing. Vivian staggered, her hand flying out to grip the wall for support. No, she gasped, her voice a hollow rasp. No, that is a lie. That is a fabricated lie. You printed that yourself to destroy us. Chloe immediately burst into hysterical sobs. The tears flowed instantly, washing away her perfectly applied makeup. She squeezed her eyes shut and started shaking her head violently. It is a mistake, Chloe cried, her voice piercing the quiet corridor. The hospital machines are wrong. They mixed up the blood samples. Zora paid him to print this. She is just a bitter, barren woman trying to ruin the happiest day of my life because she could never give Marcus a child. I looked at my former best friend, watching her play the exact same card she always played. The fragile, innocent victim crushed by the big, angry world. It was the same routine she used to get out of every lie she ever spun. You are crying the exact same crocodile tears you cried 2 years ago, Chloe? I said, my voice slicing through her hysterics like cold steel. Do you remember that day? You sat on my couch sobbing into your hands, telling Marcus your brother was going to lose his house if you did not get a loan. You cried just like this until Marcus secretly co-signed that massive debt for you. You manipulated my husband right in front of my face. You really think I am going to buy this pathetic performance now? The machines do not lie, Chloe. You do. What the hell is going on out here? The loud, angry voice boomed from the other end of the hallway. Marcus was storming toward us. He wore a designer polo shirt and his signature arrogant stride, but the confusion on his face betrayed him. He looked from his mother leaning weakly against the wall to his new wife sobbing hysterically and clutching the baby. Marcus, Chloe wailed, throwing herself toward him the moment he was within reach. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Zora is trying to ruin everything. She brought this man here with fake medical records. She paid them to say the baby is not yours. She is trying to break our family apart because she is jealous. Marcus wrapped his arms around Chloe, holding her tight. His eyes locked onto me, burning with sudden, furious indignation. He puffed out his chest, trying to play the heroic protector. He had always loved playing the savior for women who pretended they could not save themselves. Are you out of your mind, Zora? Marcus yelled, his voice echoing loudly down the hall. Is this how low you have sunk? You are so obsessed with my happiness that you are forging medical documents. You are a sick, bitter woman. I should have known you would pull some ghetto trash stunt like this. You could not give me a son, so you want to take mine away. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the man I had spent 5 years supporting, the man whose debts I had paid, whose fragile ego I had constantly massaged. You would rather believe her tears than a certified medical document? I asked, my tone completely flat. I suppose that makes sense, Marcus. You always preferred convenient lies over hard truths. You believed her when she said I fell down the stairs on purpose to terminate my pregnancy. You believed her because looking at the security footage and seeing her push me would have ruined your perfect little fantasy. You chose her fake sobs over my bleeding body. You are making the exact same mistake right now. Marcus's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He let go of Chloe and took a threatening step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. Silas smoothly stepped forward, blocking Marcus's path completely. Silas was taller, broader, and utterly unbothered by Marcus's aggressive posturing. Take one more step toward my fiancé, Silas warned, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. And I will personally ensure you leave this hospital in zip ties. Fiancé Vivian shrieked, finding her voice again. She pushed herself off the wall, pointing a shaking finger at Silas. You are engaged to this piece of trash. That explains everything. This is a coordinated attack. You are both trespassing and harassing my family. Vivian turned wildly, looking down the hallway. Security? She screamed at the top of her lungs, completely abandoning her high society decorum. Security! Get up here right now! Arrest these people! They are harassing my family! Down the hallway, the elevator doors dinged open. The chief of medicine, Dr. Harrison, marched out, flanked by 4 burly security guards in dark uniforms. Vivian's face lit up with triumphant relief. She waved her arms frantically, directing them toward us. Dr. Harrison! Thank God! Vivian cried out, adjusting her chinchilla coat and standing tall, trying to reclaim her dignity. Have these two removed immediately. They are forging hospital documents and harassing my daughter-in-law. I want them banned from the premises, and I want a full public apology from the hospital administration for letting this happen. Marcus smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. You are done, Zora. He sneered, his confidence returning now that backup had arrived. You thought you could walk in here and play games. You are about to get escorted out like the garbage you are. Dr. Harrison approached the group. He was sweating slightly, his eyes darting nervously. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at Marcus. He walked straight past the Pierce family, stopped directly in front of me, and bowed his head respectfully. Madam Chairman, Dr. Harrison said, his voice trembling slightly. I apologize profusely for the disturbance. The board has finalized the paperwork and your acquisition of the Atlanta General Network is complete. The security team is entirely at your disposal. How would you like me to handle these individuals? The silence that fell over the hallway this time was absolute. Marcus's arms dropped to his sides, his jaw hanging open in pure, unfiltered shock. Chloe stopped crying instantly, her tears drying up as she stared at the chief of medicine in total disbelief. Vivian looked like she had just been struck by a physical blow. She shook her head, stepping forward with her hands raised, her mind unable to comprehend the words she had just heard. Dr. Harrison, what are you talking about? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Acquisition. What acquisition? She is an event planner. She has no money. I smiled slowly, looking at the 3 people who had made it their life mission to break me down and keep me small. I suppose you missed the Forbes article last month, Vivian, I said, my voice ringing crystal clear in the quiet corridor. I did not just plan events. I built a private equity firm that connects venture capitalists with distressed assets. My firm, Black Diamond Vanguard, just purchased this entire hospital network for $150 million in cash. I stepped closer to Vivian, watching her eyes go wide with terror as my words finally sank in. Her entire worldview, her carefully constructed hierarchy of class and wealth, was shattering right in front of her. The VIP wing you are standing in right now. I continued, my gaze sweeping over Marcus and Chloe before locking back onto Vivian. I own it. The floor beneath your fake designer shoes. I own it. And the security guards you just screamed for, they work for me. Marcus shook his head, backing away slowly. No, he muttered, running a hand over his face. No, that is impossible. You took nothing in the divorce. You left with nothing. I left with nothing because I refused to touch the filthy scraps of your family trust, Marcus, I replied, turning to face him. I let you keep your illusion of wealth because I knew what was actually hiding in your financial statements. You want to talk about reality. Let us talk about your reality. I nodded to Silas. He pulled a slim tablet from his briefcase, tapped the screen, and held it up. The crisp, clear sound of a recorded phone call filled the hallway. It was Marcus's voice, cracking with desperation, begging a private lender for an extension on a massive high-interest loan. In the recording, Marcus was crying, promising that his mother would never find out and swearing he would pay back every dime. Silas tapped the screen, stopping the audio. He looked at Marcus with cold amusement. You have been entirely bankrupt for 2 years, Marcus Silas stated clearly. When Zora walked away from the divorce settlement, you took the money you hoarded and poured it all into a fraudulent cryptocurrency venture run by Chloe's brother. You lost every single penny of the Pierce family trust fund. Vivian let out a horrified gasp, spinning around to stare at her son. Marcus, what is he talking about? Vivian shrieked, grabbing Marcus by the arm. Tell me he is lying. Tell me the trust is safe. Marcus could not look at his mother. He stared at the floor, his entire body shaking with shame and defeat. He had nothing left to say. His perfect facade was shattered, his wealth was gone, and the child he thought would secure his legacy did not even share his blood. Chloe, sensing the total collapse of the Pierce empire, backed away toward the wall, clutching the baby tighter. She looked at Vivian like a trapped animal, her innocent mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. She realized instantly that the golden ticket she had schemed and betrayed her best friend for was completely worthless. The Pierce family was not a dynasty. It was a sinking ship, and she had intentionally drowned her own morals to climb aboard. You think I wanted to be here? Chloe suddenly snapped, her voice shrill, shedding the last remnants of her fragile victim persona. You think I actually wanted to tie myself to this bankrupt family? Vivian turned her rage onto Chloe, her eyes burning with a sudden ferocious hatred. You little tramp! Vivian screamed, lunging toward her daughter-in-law. You tricked my son! You brought another man's child into my family to steal our money! Chloe dodged Vivian's grasping hands, her own face twisting with unhidden disgust. Do not touch me, you washed-up old hag! Chloe yelled back, stepping safely behind one of my security guards. You have no money. Your son is a spineless loser who lost everything to my brother. The baby's father is my personal trainer, and he is twice the man Marcus will ever be. You people are a pathetic joke. I only stayed because I needed Marcus to pay off my brother's debt, and he was stupid enough to do it. The sound of Vivian slapping Chloe echoed sharply off the marble walls. Chloe screamed, stumbling backward and almost dropping the child. In an instant, the two women who had bonded over their shared hatred of me were tearing each other apart right in the middle of my hospital corridor. Vivian grabbed a handful of Chloe's blonde hair, yanking her downward, while Chloe shrieked and kicked out wildly, hurling curses that shattered the quiet dignity of the maternity ward. Marcus fell to his knees on the floor, completely broken, unable to even raise his voice to stop them. He sat there sobbing into his hands as his mother and his wife destroyed the last shreds of his dignity in front of the woman he had discarded. I stood watching the chaos unfold, feeling nothing but absolute peace. I had not laid a single finger on them. I had not yelled. I had merely handed them the truth and watched them choke on it. I turned to Dr. Harrison, who was staring at the brawl in absolute horror. Dr. Harrison, I said, my voice calm and authoritative, cutting effortlessly through the sounds of screaming and crying. Please have security escort these people off my property immediately. They are disturbing my patients, and we maintain a very high standard of decorum at Atlanta General. Right away, Madam Chairman Dr. Harrison responded, instantly snapping his fingers at the guards to intervene. As the guards moved in to pull Vivian and Chloe apart, separating the tangled mess of expensive coats and cheap lies, I turned my back on them. Silas offered me his arm and I took it, resting my hand lightly against his sleeve. We walked together down the pristine hallway, leaving the screaming, the crying, and the shattered Pierce legacy far behind us. They had thrown me to the wolves, expecting me to die. They did not realize I would return leading the pack. Vivian's thumb hovered over the glowing screen of her smartphone, trembling just enough to betray the widening cracks in her carefully polished armor. For a fleeting second, the pristine lily-scented hallway of Atlanta General's VIP maternity ward felt entirely devoid of oxygen. She stared at me, her eyes darting frantically as she searched my face for any trace of the old compliant Zora. She was looking for the exhausted girl who would have preemptively apologized for making her uncomfortable, the girl who would have bowed her head and retreated to avoid causing a scene. But the woman standing before her now offered nothing but a cold, impenetrable calm. Vivian's bluff had been called, and the sudden terrifying realization that I was neither intimidated by her threats nor bluffing myself temporarily paralyzed her. Her manicured fingernail hovered over the keypad, but she could not bring herself to press the numbers to summon security. The sheer weight of my confidence was suffocating her. She knew deep down in the dark, calculating corners of her mind that you do not confidently invite hospital security to a standoff unless you are absolutely certain that you own the battlefield. Before Vivian could muster the courage to dial the phone or retreat in defeat, the heavy mahogany door of the adjacent VIP suite clicked open. The sound was sharp, slicing through the heavy, toxic tension that hung between us. Slowly the door swung wide and out stepped Chloe. My former best friend looked exactly as she had always strived to appear, the tragic, delicate heroine of a story she had entirely fabricated in her own mind. Chloe was 30 years old, a white woman who had spent her entire adult life perfecting the dark art of weaponizing her own fragility. Today she was wrapped tightly in a plush cream-colored cashmere robe that undoubtedly cost more than the first car I had ever owned. She cradled a small bundle wrapped in a matching, ridiculously expensive designer blanket against her chest. Her blonde hair fell in carefully styled, artificially tousled waves around her shoulders, framing a face that was already twisting into an expression of profound, heavily rehearsed distress. This was the woman who had shared my tiny college dorm room, who had eaten cheap ramen on my faded sofa, who had held my hand and wiped my tears when my mother passed away. This was also the woman who had spent 2 full years secretly sleeping with my husband in the very bed I had picked out, all while looking me dead in the eyes over morning coffee and telling me how incredibly lucky I was to have a loyal man like Marcus. Chloe froze the moment she saw me standing in the corridor. Her eyes darted from Vivian's pale, strained face to my impassive one, and in a fraction of a second the performance of a lifetime began. Her lower lip began to quiver with cinematic precision. Her breathing hitched, becoming shallow and rapid, acting as if my mere physical presence was violently drawing the air from her lungs. She pulled the swaddled newborn tighter against her chest, holding the sleeping child like a human shield against an invisible looming monster. Zora. Chloe gasped, her voice trembling with a practiced, fragile vibrato that echoed down the hall. "What are you doing here? Why are you doing this to us?" Large crystalline tears instantly welled in her wide eyes and spilled perfectly down her flushed cheeks. It was the quintessential, undeniable display of white tears, a deeply manipulative defense mechanism designed to instantly cast me as the aggressive, irrational threat, and her as the helpless, innocent prey. She leaned heavily against the wooden doorframe, projecting an aura of sheer exhaustion and sheer terror. "Please, Zora." Chloe whimpered, her voice cracking pathetically as she clutched the baby closer. "I am begging you. Have you not done enough damage already? You need to stop clinging to our family. You need to let Marcus go and move on with your life. We just want peace. Is it not enough that you made the divorce proceeding so incredibly difficult and painful for him? Why are you stalking us at the hospital on the most important sacred day of our lives?" Vivian, suddenly emboldened by the arrival of her new compliant daughter-in-law and the visual proof of her family's continuation, immediately snapped out of her frozen paralysis. She rushed to Chloe's side, wrapping a fiercely protective arm around the younger woman's trembling shoulders and glaring at me with renewed, burning venom. Look at what you are doing! Vivian hissed, her voice dripping with extreme self-righteousness. You are terrorizing a fragile new mother. You are a monster, Zora. You have always been a dark, toxic cloud over this family. Chloe buried her face into Vivian's fur-clad shoulder, letting out a soft, dramatic sob before lifting her tear-streaked face to look at me again. She shifted the bundle in her arms, making sure I had a very clear view of the sleeping infant's face. This baby is a blessing from God, Chloe declared, her voice hitching with manufactured righteous indignation. He is a pure, innocent blessing sent from above to carry on the noble bloodline of the Pierce family. He is the brilliant future Marcus always deserved, the family you could never manage to give him. You have no place here. You have no right to stand outside my hospital door and try to poison this beautiful holy moment with your bitter, jealous obsession. I stood perfectly still, letting her hysterical, deeply offensive accusations wash over me without absorbing a single drop of her poison. Years ago, a vicious display like this would have provoked me to tears. It would have triggered the defensive, angry reaction they were both so desperately trying to bait out of me. They wanted me to raise my voice. They wanted me to step forward aggressively. They wanted me to fulfill the angry, irrational stereotype they had already assigned to me in their minds, so they could easily justify every terrible, treacherous thing they had done behind my back. But I absolutely refused to give them the satisfaction of my anger. Instead, I looked at Chloe with a profound clinical emptiness that seemed to unnerve her more than rage ever could. I let my eyes slowly travel from the top of her messy blonde hair down to the expensive cashmere robe, to the sleeping baby in her arms, and finally back up to her tear-filled, desperate eyes. You truly are a remarkable actress, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft yet sharp enough to cut through solid glass. If I did not know exactly who and what you are, I might actually feel sorry for you. But we both know the ugly truth. You are not terrified of me clinging to Marcus. You are terrified that without Marcus, you have absolutely nothing of your own. You spent 5 years coveting my life, my home, and my husband. You played the supportive, sweet best friend while sneaking into my bedroom the moment I left for work. Do not stand there in your stolen cashmere and invoke God as if the divine somehow blessed your deceit. Chloe's breath hitched, her eyes widening in genuine alarm, as the calm, razor-sharp reality of my words pierced straight through her pathetic performance. She opened her mouth to argue, to emit another dramatic wailing sob, but I did not let her speak. You wanted the Pierce family legacy so desperately that you happily sold your soul for it, I continued, my voice echoing coldly in the pristine space. You wanted the vintage Chanel, the elite country club memberships, and the grand illusion of high society superiority. Well, congratulations, Chloe. You finally have it all. You have the cheating man, you have the condescending mother-in-law, and you have the supposedly noble bloodline wrapped in that blanket. But I highly suggest you save your precious tears. You are going to need every single one of them for what is coming next. Vivian scoffed loudly, though her grip on Chloe's shoulder tightened nervously. You are completely delusional, Vivian spat, trying to sound brave. You are standing here making empty, pathetic threats because you have absolutely nothing left in your miserable life. Right on cue, a soft, melodic chime echoed from the far end of the corridor. The heavy automated glass doors that safely sealed off the VIP maternity wing slid open smoothly. The sound of deliberate, confident footsteps broke the heavy tension echoing against the polished marble floors with the steady, unstoppable rhythm of a ticking clock. I did not need to turn around to know exactly who it was. Silas walked through the glass doors, bringing with him an immediate suffocating shift in the atmosphere. He was 38 years old, a man whose formidable reputation preceded him in every major boardroom and courtroom in the city. Silas was not just a prominent legal figure. He was the most ruthless, brilliant, and successful mergers and acquisitions lawyer in the state, a legal shark who routinely dismantled corporate empires before breakfast. He was also the man I was going to marry. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored dark charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his posture radiating absolute, unquestionable dominance. He did not rush his steps. He moved with the calculated, terrifying grace of an apex predator stepping into a locked enclosure. Silas walked straight past Vivian and Chloe, not granting either of the trembling women so much as a passing glance. It was the ultimate crushing insult, a complete and total dismissal of their very existence. He stopped directly beside me, his physical presence acting as a towering wall of protection and power. Without uttering a single word, he reached out and handed me a thick, heavy medical file. The document was bound in a stark white folder, but what immediately caught the eye was the massive vivid red stamp pressed aggressively onto the front cover, the official, irreversible seal of the hospital's highest executive medical board. I took the file smoothly, feeling the heavy, definitive weight of it in my hands. It was the physical manifestation of their total impending destruction. Vivian's arrogant sneer had completely vanished. Her eyes darted wildly from the bright red stamp on the folder up to Silas's chest, where a solid gold badge gleamed brightly against his dark suit lapel. It was not a standard visitor's pass or a regular doctor's ID. It was the heavy, unmistakable insignia of the hospital's supreme advisor, a position of ultimate authority granted only to the absolute highest echelon of the institution's executive control. The blood drained so rapidly from Vivian's face that her expensive, heavily applied foundation suddenly looked like a tragic, chalky mask. Her mouth fell open, her jaw going completely slack as the realization struck her with the devastating force of a physical blow. Her eyes bulged fixed in absolute, unadulterated terror on the gold badge, her hands dropping limply from Chloe's shoulders. She stumbled back a step, the arrogant, untouchable matriarch instantly reduced to a trembling, breathless shell, finally understanding that she had not just insulted her former daughter-in-law, she had just declared war on the owners of the battlefield. "What the hell is going on out here?" The booming voice echoed down the corridor, bouncing off the pristine marble walls. Heavy, hurried footsteps signaled his approach. Marcus came rounding the corner from the direction of the cafeteria, holding a pink gift bag and looking every bit the proud 35-year-old patriarch he pretended to be. He wore a crisp designer polo and a tailored blazer, effortlessly projecting the image of a wealthy, successful family man. But I knew better. I knew the hollow, insecure core that lived beneath the expensive fabric. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, taking in the scene. He saw his mother leaning against the wall, looking as though she had seen a ghost. He saw Silas standing tall and immovable, holding the medical file. And then he saw me. The arrogant smirk he usually wore instantly morphed into a scowl of pure, unfiltered rage. Chloe did not waste a single second. The moment she heard his voice, her survival instincts kicked into high gear. She practically threw herself across the hallway, abandoning Vivian and burying her face directly into Marcus' chest. She sobbed with such violent theatrical force that the baby in her arms jolted awake and began to wail, adding a chaotic soundtrack to her performance. "Marcus." She choked out, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Marcus. Thank God you are here. It is Zora. She is trying to ruin everything." Marcus immediately wrapped his arms around her, kissing the top of her head and glaring daggers at me. He puffed out his chest, standing taller, eagerly slipping into the role of the valiant protector, defending his fragile maiden. It was a dynamic he craved. He needed a woman who made him feel large, because deep down, he knew exactly how small he truly was. "What are you doing here?" Zora Marcus demanded, his voice booming with forced authority. "Have you completely lost your mind? Are you stalking us now?" Chloe did not give me a chance to answer. She tilted her head back, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "She brought this man with her." "Marcus," Chloe cried, pointing a shaking finger at Silas. "She paid him to print out fake medical records. She gave him a fake badge. They are trying to tell us that our baby is not yours. She paid him to forge a blood test just to break our family apart because she is so sick and jealous of our happiness." Marcus' face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. The veins in his neck strained against his collar as he processed her hysterical lies. He did not look at the file. He did not look at Silas' badge. He just looked at Chloe Tears and instantly swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Are you out of your mind, Zora? Marcus yelled, taking a threatening step forward, though he wisely stopped short of getting too close to Silas. Is this how pathetic your life has become? You could not give me a child, so you want to take mine away. You are so obsessed with my happiness that you would sink to paying some random thug to forge medical documents. You are a sick, bitter woman. I should have known you would pull some ghetto trash stunt like this to ruin the best day of my life. He sneered at me, his eyes sweeping up and down my tailored suit with absolute disgust. You need to pack up your little rented actor and get the hell out of my hospital before I have you both arrested for harassment. You are a failure, Zora. Accept it and move on. I stood perfectly still, letting his venom crash against the invisible shield of my absolute indifference. I did not raise my voice. I did not clench my fists. I simply looked at the man I had spent 5 years supporting, the man whose debts I had secretly paid, whose fragile ego I had constantly massaged to keep our marriage afloat. I looked at him and felt nothing but a profound, chilling pity. You would rather believe her tears than medical science, Marcus? I asked, my tone completely flat, devoid of any emotion. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance just enough to watch him instinctively tense. Silas shifted smoothly right beside me, an unspoken warning that kept Marcus firmly in his place. I suppose that makes perfect sense, I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet corridor. You always preferred convenient lies over hard truths. You believed her tears 2 years ago, did you not? You believed her when she stood over my bleeding body and swore to you that I threw myself down the stairs on purpose to terminate our pregnancy. Marcus flinched, his eyes darting away for a fraction of a second. The memory hung in the air, heavy and toxic. You believed her hysterical sobbing instead of simply looking at our home security cameras? I said, my words slicing through the silence like a scalpel. You chose to believe that your own wife murdered your unborn child rather than face the reality that your sweet, innocent best friend deliberately pushed me down those stairs to clear her path to your wallet. You chose her fake sobs over my shattered life because the lie was easier for your weak mind to handle. You are making the exact same mistake right now, Marcus. Only this time you cannot delete the footage to protect her. Shut up, Marcus roared, his face twisting in sudden, desperate panic. You are lying. You have always been a manipulative liar. Chloe would never do that. And this baby is mine. He is a Pierce. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression that made Vivian whimper softly from her spot against the wall. She knew. She had seen the file, but Marcus was still desperately clinging to the illusion. A Pierce, I repeated softly. Is that what she told you? Tell me, Marcus, do you know your own blood type? It is AB, a very rare, very distinct biological fact. And do you know Chloe blood type? It is also AB. I gestured toward the file Silas was holding. But the hospital just drew blood from that beautiful little boy you are defending so fiercely. He is type O, Marcus. 2 parents with a B blood cannot create a type O child. It is a biological impossibility. The math does not add up, and neither does your perfect little legacy. Marcus froze. The arrogant bluster evaporated from his posture, leaving him looking suddenly hollowed out. He slowly turned his head to look down at Chloe, who was still clinging to his shirt. The wailing of the baby seemed to fade into the background as the crushing weight of science collided with his immense, fragile ego. Chloe, tell her she is lying, Marcus said, his voice suddenly sounding very small, very unsure. Tell her it is a lie. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, crying harder, refusing to meet his gaze. It is a fake, she sobbed, burying her face deeper into his chest. She paid them, Marcus. She paid the nurses. It is a conspiracy to destroy us. Please, you have to believe me. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was growing with violent speed. Marcus looked up from his crying wife and locked eyes with his mother. Vivian was still pressed against the wall, staring at the gold executive badge on Silas' chest. She had not rushed to Chloe's defense. She had not screamed at me to leave. She just stood there, looking utterly defeated. Mom, Marcus asked, his voice cracking. Mom, tell them to leave. Vivian slowly shook her head, her perfectly styled hair falling limply around her face. She cannot. Marcus Vivian whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. We cannot make them leave. That man, she pointed a shaking manicured finger at Silas. He is the supreme advisor. They own the hospital, Marcus. They own everything. The revelation struck Marcus with the force of a freight train. He staggered backward, physically separating himself from Chloe. He looked at Silas, taking in the undeniable aura of power, the custom suit, the terrifyingly calm demeanor. Then he looked at me, the girl from South Atlanta, the woman he had discarded because she lacked the proper pedigree. You own the hospital. Marcus choked out the words, barely making it past his lips. Silas finally spoke, his deep voice vibrating with absolute authority. Black Diamond Vanguard. Miss Zora, private equity firm finalized the acquisition of Atlanta General this morning, he stated smoothly. You are currently standing in her building, breathing her air and causing a disturbance in her maternity ward. And as her legal counsel, I strongly suggest you stop shouting at my fiancé before I have you permanently removed from the premises. Marcus' jaw went completely slack. He looked back and forth between me and Silas, his mind desperately trying to process a reality that completely shattered his entire existence. The woman he thought was a broke, bitter failure was standing before him as a titan of industry. The child he thought would cement his status as a family patriarch belonged to another man. And the woman he had left me for was nothing but a treacherous, lying parasite who had used him for his name. I watched the realization break him piece by piece. The arrogance melted away, leaving behind nothing but a pathetic, desperate man who had played a foolish game and lost everything. I did not need to raise my hand to destroy him. I just needed to hand him the truth. Silas did not grant Vivian the courtesy of a greeting. He did not acknowledge her extravagant fur coat, her rigid posture, or the sheer vibrating terror radiating from her trembling frame. To Silas, Vivian Pierce was not the formidable, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta elite society. She was merely a nuisance, a minor administrative error, standing in a building he now controlled, and he treated her with the exact level of cold, clinical detachment that such an error deserved. He reached out his long, elegant fingers, effortlessly, taking the sealed medical file back from my hands. The sharp, tearing sound of the thick paper seal being broken echoed down the silent, immaculate corridor. It sounded impossibly loud, slicing through the heavy, toxic tension like a striking match in a dark powder keg. Chloe, completely oblivious to the massive power dynamic that had just shifted in the hallway, finally broke the silence. Her dramatic, manufactured tears had temporarily stalled, replaced by genuine, petulant confusion as she looked between Vivian paralyzed expression and Silas' imposing, authoritative figure. Vivian, who is this man? Chloe demanded, her voice losing its fragile vibrato and creeping into a shrill, entitled whine. You cannot just let them stand here and threaten us. Call security like you said. They are harassing a new mother. We need them thrown out immediately. Vivian could not speak. Her throat worked convulsively, but no sound emerged. She remained pinned beneath Silas' heavy, unyielding stare, her eyes fixed in pure horror on the gold executive badge gleaming against his dark suit lapel. Security will not be necessary. Silas said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that commanded absolute, unquestionable authority. He did not look at Chloe. He kept his gaze fixed entirely on Vivian, watching the older woman practically shrink under the crushing weight of his presence. In fact, I believe you should be immensely grateful that we are having this conversation in a private, restricted corridor, Vivian, because what is contained within this file is not something you want broadcasted to your elite country club friends. He flipped the heavy folder open. His dark eyes scanned the crisp white pages of the laboratory report. The document bore the official, undeniable stamp of the Hospital Genetics and Neonatal Screening Department. Let us review the fundamental biology of this remarkable Pierce family legacy you are so fiercely protecting. Silas began, his tone remarkably conversational, which only made it infinitely more terrifying. A legacy that, according to your rather loud declarations just moments ago, relies entirely on absolute purity, exceptional pedigree, and unquestionable lineage. Vivian breath hitched sharply in her chest. She raised a trembling jewel-encrusted hand as if she could physically ward off the devastating words he was about to speak. Please. She choked out her voice, barely a ragged whisper, the polished southern charm completely stripped away. Whatever that is, this is not the time. Do not do this here. Oh, I assure you there is absolutely no better time, Silas countered effortlessly, his face a mask of stone. He held the document up, angling it just enough so the stark, bold black ink was visible under the harsh fluorescent lights of the maternity ward. According to the official medical records drawn by the neonatal staff less than an hour ago, Marcus Pierce, your son, possesses blood type AB. This is an indisputable matter of public medical record within this facility. Silas turned his head slowly, his piercing gaze finally breaking away from Vivian to land squarely on Chloe. My former best friend instinctively took a step back, pulling the swaddled baby tighter against her chest. Her eyes grew wide, and suddenly very alert, the performance of the exhausted victim instantly vanishing as pure, unfiltered self-preservation took over. You, Chloe, also possess blood type AB, Silas continued, his voice echoing cleanly off the polished marble walls, a relatively rare and highly specific biological marker. Chloe's face twitched. The color began to drain rapidly from her cheeks, as the terrifying realization of where this conversation was heading slowly dawned on her. I do not know what you are talking about, she stammered, her grip on her designer diaper bag, tightening until her knuckles turned stark white. These are private medical records. You have absolutely no right to look at them. This is illegal. Silas ignored her weak, desperate protest, returning his unwavering attention to the paper in his hands. But here is where the science becomes truly fascinating, he said, his voice dropping into a register of pure, lethal calm. He looked back up, locking eyes with Vivian once more. The holy blessing from God, currently resting in that expensive cashmere blanket, the true heir to your noble bloodline, has just been screened by the pediatric staff. He possesses blood type O. A heavy, suffocating silence slammed into the corridor. It was the kind of absolute ringing stillness that precedes a catastrophic structural collapse. I am a lawyer, Vivian, not a geneticist, Silas stated, his words precise, measured, and entirely unforgiving. But even a rudimentary middle school understanding of human biology dictates an uncompromising universal rule. A man with type AB blood and a woman with type AB blood cannot, under any mathematical, scientific, or biological circumstances, produce a child with type O blood. It is a fundamental biological impossibility. Silas closed the heavy folder with a sharp, definitive snap that made both women flinch. He looked directly at Vivian, delivering the final devastating blow with flawless execution. Legally and biologically speaking, this child is absolutely not the son of Marcus Pierce. Congratulations, Vivian. Your noble bloodline has just been tainted by some faceless stranger. The physical reaction to the revelation was instantaneous and violent. The heavy quilted designer diaper bag slipped off Chloe's shoulder. It hit the marble floor with a loud, sickening thud, bursting open and spilling silver pacifier clasps, expensive organic baby formulas, and meticulously packed pristine white cloths across the glossy tiles. Chloe stumbled backward as if she had been struck squarely in the chest by a sledgehammer. The blood completely vanished from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly, translucent white. Her mouth dropped open in a silent scream of absolute, unadulterated panic. The grand, elaborate illusion she had spent 2 years meticulously building was gone. The treacherous manipulation, the stolen husband, the carefully timed and planned pregnancy, it had all just been completely obliterated in less than 60 seconds. The golden ticket she had secured to extract herself from her own mediocre life and permanently embed herself into the wealth of the Pierce family was entirely worthless, and she knew it. She clutched the sleeping infant, her eyes darting wildly down the hallway, like a cornered, desperate animal, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. There was nowhere to hide from the science. But Vivian's reaction was even more profound, a total physical and psychological collapse. The matriarch of the Pierce family, the woman who had spent 5 agonizing years tormenting me, belittling my South Atlanta roots, and cruelly weaponizing my deeply personal fertility struggles, physically crumpled under the crushing weight of the revelation. Her knees visibly buckled beneath her. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp, her manicured hands desperately clawing at the smooth wall to keep herself from hitting the floor. Her massive, ridiculous chinchilla coat slipped off her shivering shoulders, pooling around her designer heels like a discarded, worthless costume. No. Vivian wheezed, her chest heaving violently as she struggled to draw breath in the suddenly suffocating corridor. She looked wildly at Chloe, then at the baby, and finally back to Silas, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate denial. No, that is a lie. That is a completely fabricated lie. You printed that yourself to destroy us. You are trying to ruin my family. I assure you, Vivian, my firm does not deal in fabrications. Silas replied smoothly, his expression devoid of even a single shred of pity or remorse. We deal strictly in facts, and the biological fact is the prestigious air you have been parading around this hospital all morning is a complete and utter fraud. I stood silently beside Silas, watching the total, undeniable destruction of the two women who had tried to break my spirit and cast me out into the cold. For years, Vivian had whispered to her elite country club friends that my blood was unworthy of the Pierce name, that I was defective, that I was a peasant trying to masquerade as royalty. She had cheered loudly when Chloe, a woman with the supposedly right background and the right complexion, had swooped in to replace me. She had gloated incessantly about the absolute purity of her family tree. And now, the irrefutable, unbending truth of science had turned her greatest source of pride into her ultimate, inescapable humiliation. The very weapon she had used to cut me down had just severed her own family legacy at the root. The sheer poetic justice of the moment was intoxicating. I did not need to scream or cry or lower myself to their pathetic level of petty insults and dramatic outbursts. I did not need to defend my worth or my background. I simply stood my ground and watched as the crushing weight of their own arrogant deceit drove them both straight into the marble floor. The crushing silence that followed Marcus' realization was suddenly shattered by a harsh grating sound. Vivian was laughing. It was not a sound of amusement, but a brittle, hysterical noise born of absolute arrogant denial. She refused to accept the reality that was staring her in the face. She pushed herself away from the wall, her manicured hands aggressively smoothing down the front of her ruined chinchilla coat. She stepped squarely between Marcus and Silas, tilting her chin up to glare at us with the desperate arrogance of a cornered animal. "You actually think this pathetic little charade is going to work?" Vivian spat, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "You think you can walk into a secure medical facility, flash a piece of cheap plastic, and hand us a forged document to destroy my family? You have severely underestimated who you are dealing with, Zora. I am Vivian Pierce," she continued, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "My family built the foundation of this city elite society. I will have my attorneys file a massive lawsuit against you, against this man, and against this entire hospital by the end of the hour. We will sue you for gross defamation, criminal trespassing, and illegal invasion of medical privacy. I will make sure you are both buried under so much debt you will never see the light of day." Silas simply raised a dark eyebrow, entirely unfazed by her screeching. He did not even bother to grace her threat with a verbal response. His silence only infuriated her more. Infuriated by his total dismissal, Vivian spun around. Down the long corridor, a team of 4 hospital security guards in dark uniforms had just rounded the corner, responding to the escalating noise. Vivian's face lit up with a vicious, triumphant gleam. She truly believed that wealth and privilege gave her the power to command the world. "Security!" Vivian shrieked at the top of her lungs, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her high society decorum. "Guards, get over here right this instant. These 2 individuals are imposters. They are harassing my family and trespassing in the VIP ward. Restrain them and throw them out immediately." The guards broke into a heavy jog, their heavy boots thudding loudly against the polished marble floor. Chloe let out a breath of relief, stepping out from behind Marcus to watch the spectacle. Marcus just stared blankly, still paralyzed by the blood test revelation, but Vivian stood tall, ready to watch me get dragged out in handcuffs. The lead guard, a burly man with a stern face, approached our group rapidly. Vivian pointed a sharp, accusatory finger directly at my chest. But the guard did not reach for his radio. He did not reach for his handcuffs. He stopped 2 feet away from me, his eyes landing on Silas, and then shifting immediately to my face. He snapped to attention. With a sharp hand signal, he halted the 3 guards behind him. In perfect synchronized unison, the 4 large men stepped back, formed 2 neat lines against the corridor walls, and bowed their heads deeply in my direction. Vivian's arm dropped heavily to her side. Her jaw fell open. She looked from the bowing guards to me, her mind entirely failing to comprehend the visual input it was receiving. "What are you doing?" Vivian demanded, her voice cracking with confusion and panic. "I said arrest them. Why are you bowing to this trash?" Before the guard could even attempt to answer, the silver doors of the private elevator at the end of the hall slid open with a soft chime. Dr. Harrison, the chief of medicine and the hospital primary administrative director, practically sprinted out. He was a distinguished man in his late 50s, but right now his face was flushed bright red and he was sweating profusely. He frantically dabbed at his forehead with a white linen handkerchief as he hurried down the hall. Vivian's eyes lit up with renewed hope. She recognized him instantly, having demanded VIP treatment from him upon her arrival yesterday. "Dr. Harrison." "Thank God," Vivian cried out, taking a confident step toward him. "You need to fire your entire security team right now. They are refusing to remove these trespassers. This woman has forged medical documents to harass my daughter-in-law and spread vicious lies." Dr. Harrison did not even look at her. He completely ignored Vivian, outstretched hand, and blew right past her as if she were a piece of invisible furniture. He stopped squarely in front of me, breathing heavily, and immediately bowed his head in a gesture of profound, unwavering respect. "Madame Chairman," Dr. Harrison gasped out, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed me, "I apologize profusely for the inconvenience and the noise. My assistant just notified me of the disturbance on this floor. The final share transfer paperwork was fully completed and approved this morning. Everything is officially finalized. How would you like me to handle these disruptive guests?" The absolute silence that crashed down on the hallway this time was suffocating. Chloe stopped breathing, her tears instantly drying up. Marcus slowly turned his head to stare at the chief of medicine, his eyes wide with a horrified, dawning realization. Vivian looked like she had just been struck by a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest. "Madam Chairman." Vivian whispered the words, tasting like ash in her dry mouth. "Dr. Harrison, what are you talking about? She is an event planner. She has no money. What share transfer?" I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The polished floor seemed to amplify the sound of my heels as I closed the distance between us. I looked at the 3 people who had made it their life mission to keep me small, to discard me when I was no longer useful, and to mock my very existence. The moment of sweet, absolute revenge had finally arrived. "I suppose you missed the major financial announcements this morning, Vivian," I said, my voice ringing crystal clear and authoritative in the silent corridor. I did not just spend the last few years planning events. I built a private equity firm that specializes in acquiring and restructuring distressed assets. My firm, Black Diamond Vanguard, just spent $150 million in cash to purchase this entire private hospital network. I watched Vivian's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated terror as the truth finally crushed her completely. Her entire worldview, her deeply ingrained hierarchy of wealth and class, was burning to the ground right in front of her. The woman she had tormented for years, the woman she believed was utterly beneath her, was now standing before her as a titan of industry. "The VIP wing you are standing in right now." I continued, my gaze sweeping over Marcus and Chloe before locking back onto Vivian's trembling face. "I own it. The very floor beneath your fake designer shoes belongs to me. The security guards you just tried to order around, they are on my payroll. You are not a prestigious guest in an elite facility anymore, Vivian. You are currently trespassing in my house." Marcus let out a strangled gasp, backing away until his shoulders hit the wall. He stared at me as if seeing me for the very first time. His mind was breaking under the rapid succession of truths. The child he had been so proud of was a biological lie. The woman he had abandoned me for was a parasitic fraud. And the wife he had thrown away was now a multimillionaire who held his entire family reputation in the palm of her hand. "No," Marcus muttered, violently shaking his head. "No, this is impossible. You left the divorce with nothing. You refused the settlement. I left with nothing because I refused to touch the filthy, rapidly dwindling scraps of your family trust." "Marcus," I replied, turning my cold gaze onto him, "I let you keep your illusion of wealth because I knew exactly what was hiding in your financial statements. You want to talk about reality. Let us talk about your reality. Let us talk about what happens when fake elite status meets actual power." Marcus let out a sharp, derisive bark of laughter, violently shaking his head as he pushed himself away from the wall. The initial shock that had paralyzed him was rapidly melting away, replaced by a frantic, boiling rage. His fragile, carefully manicured ego simply could not process the reality of his own defeat. To accept that I, the woman he had repeatedly called worthless, the woman he had discarded for a newer, blonder model, was now the absolute authority in this building, was a psychological impossibility for him. So like a cornered, desperate animal, he lashed out with the only weapon he had ever truly known, his unearned, completely fabricated sense of superiority. "You actually think I am going to buy this ridiculous performance?" Marcus shouted, his face contorting into an ugly, arrogant sneer as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are nothing but a puppet, Zora. Do you really expect anyone here to believe that a failed event planner from the South Side suddenly controls a billion-dollar private equity firm? Whoever actually owns Black Diamond Vanguard is just using you as a cheap, temporary figurehead. You are a lucky lower-class fraud playing dress-up in a world you will never truly belong to." He puffed out his chest, stepping forward to loom over the space, desperately trying to reclaim the dominance that was slipping like sand through his fingers. He looked at Dr. Harrison, then at his mother, actively seeking validation for his delusion. "You want to talk about actual power?" Marcus boasted, his voice echoing loudly off the polished marble tiles, desperately trying to drown out the quiet, devastating truth Silas had just delivered. "The Pierce Family Trust is the financial bedrock of Atlanta. We have generational wealth that your corporate masters could only dream of touching. Just yesterday, I closed a $50 million commercial real estate project in Midtown. $50 million, Zora. That is real money. That is untouchable elite power. You can rent a hospital wing and buy off a security team to harass my family, but you will always be the same pathetic, desperate girl begging for scraps from my table." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his frantic, sweating energy. I stood perfectly still, watching the veins pulse against the collar of his designer shirt. It was genuinely fascinating to witness the total disintegration of a man who had built his entire identity on a mountain of absolute lies. For years, Marcus had used his family wealth as a blunt instrument to batter my self-esteem into submission. He had constantly reminded me of my modest background, making sure I knew that every luxury I enjoyed was a gift granted solely by his grace. He had demanded my gratitude while secretly plunging a knife into my back. And now, standing in the pristine hallway of a hospital I owned, I watched him cling to that same invisible wealth like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. The sheer magnificent irony of his arrogance was almost too beautiful to interrupt. $50 million, I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the heavy, sterile air. I tilted my head, looking at him with an expression of profound clinical pity. "You always were an empty barrel, Marcus. You make the most noise when you have absolutely nothing inside." Marcus' face turned a mottled, dangerous shade of purple. He opened his mouth to unleash another torrent of classist insults, but Silas smoothly stepped forward, cutting him off with the effortless grace of an executioner stepping up to the block. Silas did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His physical presence alone was enough to suck the remaining oxygen straight out of the corridor. He casually reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a sleek silver tablet. The polished metal caught the harsh fluorescent light as he tapped the screen with one long, elegant finger. Let us examine the current state of this untouchable Pierce family trust, Silas said, his smooth baritone voice dripping with a terrifying icy amusement. Because as the new owners of the Atlanta General Network, our firm conducts extremely thorough financial background checks on any high-profile individuals utilizing the VIP facilities. We need to ensure our patients can actually afford the bills they are racking up. And what we found regarding your $50 million real estate empire, Marcus, was deeply illuminating. Silas tapped the screen one final time. He did not look at Marcus. He turned the device so the small, powerful speaker faced the group and he pressed play. The audio recording was incredibly crisp, lacking any static or background noise. It did not capture the booming, arrogant voice of a wealthy patriarch closing a massive commercial deal. Instead, the hallway was suddenly filled with the pathetic nasal wet sound of a grown man sobbing. "Please, Mr. Vance, I am begging you." It was Marcus' voice, but it was entirely stripped of its usual bravado. It was a voice choked with panic terror and undeniable desperation. "You have to give me another 30 days. The recorded voice of Marcus pleaded, his breath hitching wildly, as if he were physically hyperventilating. "I am on my knees right now. I swear to God, I am on my knees. The trust fund is completely tapped out. The crypto exchange froze the remaining assets, and I cannot access a single dime. If you go to my mother, if you touch the estate in Buckhead, she will disown me. I will lose everything. Just give me the extension. I will pay the 40% interest. I will sign over the cars. Just please do not hurt my family." A cold, gravelly voice responded on the recording, completely devoid of empathy. "You have exactly 1 week, Pierce. If the $2 million is not in my account by Friday, I am taking the Buckhead property and I am sending my associates to introduce themselves to your lovely new wife." The recording ended with the sharp, definitive click of a disconnected line, followed by the sound of Marcus weeping uncontrollably into the receiver. Silas tapped the screen, slipping the tablet back into his jacket pocket with a smooth, practiced motion. The silence that slammed down on the corridor this time was absolute, ringing in my ears, like the aftermath of a massive explosion. It was the sound of a generational dynasty instantly vaporizing into thin air. Vivian Pierce looked as though she had been physically struck by a bolt of lightning. She was no longer leaning against the wall. She was slowly sliding down it, her perfectly manicured hands clutching the fabric of her expensive dress, as if she were trying to hold her own internal organs inside her body. Her face, usually a mask of haughty Southern judgment, was contorted into a portrait of pure, unadulterated horror. She stared at her son, her chest heaving, completely unable to process the words she had just heard. "You borrowed money from a shadow lender." Vivian gasped, her voice nothing but a hollow, broken wheeze. "You put a lien on the family estate. Marcus, what have you done? You told me the trust was flourishing. You told me you doubled our assets in the commercial sector." Marcus could not speak. The arrogant, posturing alpha male who had just been screaming about his elite status was entirely gone. He stood frozen in the center of the hallway, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the marble floor. He looked exactly like the pathetic crying coward on the audio recording. His jaw worked silently, but he had absolutely no defense. There were no lies left to spin. The elite, untouchable Pierce family fortune did not exist. It was a hollow shell eaten away by terrible investments, desperate greed, and staggering, dangerous debt. And then there was Chloe. My former best friend had stopped crying the moment Silas mentioned the financial background check. Now she was staring at Marcus with an expression of such profound, visceral disgust that it almost mirrored my own. She slowly lowered the swaddled crying baby away from her chest. The delicate, fragile victim persona she had worn like a second skin evaporated instantly, revealing the cold, calculating opportunist lurking underneath. She had betrayed me, destroyed my marriage, and manipulated her way into this family for one singular reason: wealth, She had endured Vivian condescending insults, she had tolerated Marcus' suffocating insecure ego, all for the promise of the Pierce family trust. She thought she had secured a golden ticket that would elevate her far above the cheap apartments and the mountains of credit card debt her brother had drowning her in. "You are broke," Chloe said, her voice dropping its high-pitched feminine whine, revealing a harsh, flat tone I had never heard her use before. "You let me believe I was marrying into a dynasty, and you are literally begging loan sharks for your life. You are entirely bankrupt." I looked at Marcus, watching him slowly raise his head to meet Chloe's furious gaze. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to offer some pathetic excuse, but I did not let him find his voice. "That $50 million commercial project you were just bragging about, Marcus?" I said, my voice slicing through the heavy, humiliated silence. "It never existed. You took the last $3 million of your mother generational wealth and dumped it into a fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme run by a shell company in the Caymans. A shell company that, ironically enough, was recommended to you by Chloe's brother. You lost every single penny you had, and then you went to a violent credit broker to try and cover your tracks. You are not a titan of industry. You are a spineless, desperate gambler who just lost his entire life." I took one final step forward, standing directly in front of the broken, shattered remains of the man I used to call my husband. He could not even lift his eyes to look at me. The absolute suffocating shame radiating from him was palpable. "You thought I was the liability in your perfect elite life, Marcus?" I said, my words cold and deliberate. "But the truth is, I was the only thing keeping you afloat. I paid off your secret credit cards when we were married. I managed the accounts you were too incompetent to balance. I let you play the wealthy, successful provider because I loved you enough to protect your fragile pride. And you thanked me by throwing me down a flight of stairs to protect a woman who was actively draining your bank accounts. You discarded me because I was a commoner, and you chose Chloe because she fit your fake elite aesthetic." I gestured to the screaming baby in Chloe's arms, then to his mother, who was now quietly weeping against the wall, entirely destroyed by the loss of her precious social standing. "Well, look at your elite aesthetic now, Marcus. Your mother is about to lose her mansion to a loan shark. Your wife only wanted your wallet, which is currently empty, and that child, that precious Pierce legacy you were so proud of, belongs to another man. You traded everything real in your life for a cheap, hollow illusion, and now you get to live in the absolute ruin you created." Ooh. Vivian stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic jerks. The designer fabrics she wore suddenly looked too large for her shrinking frame. Her eyes darted rapidly between Silas Marcus and the empty space on the floor, desperately trying to construct a reality where she was still the untouchable queen of Atlanta society. But the cold, hard marble beneath her feet was mine. The security guards blocking the exits were mine. And the devastating truth echoing in the corridor was entirely her own doing. "Do you remember the day our divorce was finalized, Vivian?" I asked, stepping closer to her. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of years of silent suffering, finally transforming into a lethal weapon. "You cornered me in the hallway of that courthouse. You practically shoved that heavily doctored prenuptial agreement into my chest. You were so terrified that my dirty, unworthy South Atlanta hands were going to snatch away your precious family fortune. You chased me out with absolutely nothing, bragging to all your elite country club friends that you successfully protected the Pierce legacy from a manipulative gold digger." Vivian swallowed hard. Her throat worked convulsively, but she could not find a single word of defense. "But you had no idea what you were actually protecting." I continued, circling her slowly like a predator examining a trapped prey. "By cutting me out, by making sure I left with nothing, you signed your own death warrant. When I was married to Marcus, I was the one who balanced the books. I was the one who caught his reckless spending and stopped him from making catastrophic financial mistakes. The very money you refused to split with me, the millions you so desperately hoarded, went straight into Marcus' unsupervised hands." Marcus let out a pathetic whimpering sound, sinking down until he was practically sitting on his heels against the wall. He buried his face in his hands, unable to look at his mother. "And because your son was so desperate to prove he was a visionary investor," I said, my gaze shifting from the broken man on the floor to the trembling woman clutching the baby. He listened to the sweet, poisonous whispers of his new acceptable, perfectly pedigreed girlfriend. Chloe took another frantic step backward, her designer heels scraping harshly against the marble. She shook her head, her blonde hair flying wildly around her face. "I did not do anything," Chloe stammered, her voice high and breathless. "I do not know anything about investments. I just loved him." "Stop lying," Silas commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. "My legal team tracked the digital footprint of the entire transaction. The Cayman Islands shell company that absorbed the Pierce Family Trust was registered under the name of Julian Vance, your older brother." Marcus' head snapped up, his bloodshot eyes locked onto Chloe. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. "You introduced me to him," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and absolute agony. "You told me Julian was a genius. You told me he was managing offshore accounts for billionaires. You promised me it was a guaranteed return that would double the trust in 6 months. I just passed along an introduction." Chloe shrieked, backing away until she bumped hard against the heavy oak doors of a hospital suite. "I am not responsible for your stupid financial choices, Marcus. You were the one who wired the money. You were the one who signed the papers. Do not try to blame my family because you are an incompetent idiot who wanted to play big shot." "They did not just steal from you, Vivian," I said, bringing the final devastating piece of the puzzle directly to the matriarch. "They drained your generational wealth to line their own pockets using your own son, crushing arrogance to do it. The fortune you fought so hard to keep from me funded the very scam that is putting a violent loan shark in your living room by the end of this week. Your precious, pure-blooded daughter-in-law orchestrated the total annihilation of the Pierce family." Vivian's neck creaked as she slowly turned her head to look at Chloe. The absolute devastation on the older woman's face instantly hardened into a mask of pure murderous rage. The grand illusion of her superior lineage had been shattered. The woman she had championed over me, the woman whose background and complexion she had deemed worthy of the Pierce name, was nothing but a parasite who had bled her family dry. "You!" Vivian whispered, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, venomous wrath. She took a step toward Chloe, her hands curling into tight, trembling claws. "You planned this. You stole my grandson's future. You stole my home. You stole everything." "I did not steal anything," Chloe yelled defensively, clutching the baby so tightly against her chest that the infant began to squirm in discomfort. "Your son handed it to us because he is a pathetic, desperate loser who wanted to impress me." Vivian took another aggressive step forward, her eyes blazing with a frantic, unhinged energy. "I welcomed you into my home. I gave you my family name. I threw out a woman who actually cared for my son so I could give you the world. And you brought a bastard child into my house and robbed us blind. Give me that baby. Give me the child right now." "No!" Chloe screamed, twisting her body away. "Stay back. Do not touch me." The sudden violent shouting startled the infant. The baby, who had been relatively quiet throughout the ordeal, suddenly let out a piercing, ear-splitting wail. The sharp, frantic cries echoed loudly off the hard marble walls, amplifying the chaotic breakdown of the Pierce family into a deafening crescendo. Chloe panicked. Surrounded by Silas' imposing security guards, cornered by a furious Vivian, and completely exposed by the irrefutable truth, her carefully constructed facade of the sweet, refined Southern belle shattered into a million jagged pieces. The stress, the noise, and the realization that her golden ticket had just been incinerated pushed her over the edge. "Shut up," Chloe hissed, giving the crying baby a rough, impatient shake. "Just shut up. Do not you dare hurt that child!" Vivian screamed, lunging forward with her hands outstretched. "You manipulative, lying thief. You are going to rot in a prison cell for the rest of your miserable life. I will make sure you and your brother pay for what you have done to us." Chloe snapped. The absolute, unfiltered ugliness lurking beneath her polished exterior exploded outward. She shoved Vivian away with her free hand, her face twisting into an expression of pure, unmasked bigotry and venom. "Stay away from me!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as the baby wailed louder. "You think I wanted to be stuck in this pathetic, bankrupt family? You actually believed your money made you equal to us. You are nothing but a loud, ignorant ghetto monkey playing dress-up in stolen pearls." The words slammed into the corridor like a physical shockwave. The heavy, suffocating silence that instantly followed was absolute, broken only by the continued frantic crying of the infant. The sheer venomous hatred in Chloe's voice was undeniable. She had not just insulted Vivian. She had weaponized her race, stripping away decades of Vivian elite social conditioning to reduce her to the ugliest, most vile stereotype imaginable. Vivian physically recoiled, as if she had been splashed with battery acid. Her eyes widened to an impossible size, and the remaining color drained entirely from her face. Her jaw trembled silently. For a woman who had spent her entire life desperately clawing for social superiority, trying to distance herself from the very roots she felt ashamed of, the slur was the ultimate inescapable humiliation. It proved that no matter how much wealth Vivian accumulated, no matter how many country club memberships she bought, the woman she had chosen to elevate and welcome into her home had always viewed her as subhuman. Chloe did not stop there. The dam had broken, and years of her own toxic racist resentment flooded the pristine corridor. Cornered by the irrefutable truth of her financial crimes and stripped of her elegant disguise, she lashed out with the most vicious, devastating weapon she had in her arsenal. "Do you honestly think I wanted my perfect child to carry the poor black blood of you people?" Chloe sneered, her upper lip curling in absolute disgust as she looked down at Vivian. "You parade around Buckhead in your designer suits and your ridiculous furs, pretending you are royalty, but you are nothing but new money trash. You reek of desperation, Vivian. You were so utterly eager to have a daughter-in-law with my complexion, so desperate for my white pedigree to validate your pathetic social climbing, that you blindly handed me the keys to your entire fortune." Vivian remained frozen, her mouth working silently as the brutal racist reality of Chloe's words struck her again and again. "You want to know the truth about your precious heir?" Chloe continued, her voice echoing shrilly, completely unhinged. "His name is Chad. He is my personal trainer. A real man with actual genetics, not some insecure, whining mama boy playing dress-up with a trust fund. I never loved Marcus. I could barely stomach being in the same room as him. I only needed a pathetic, gullible idiot to play the provider, so I could funnel that ridiculous Pierce family cash to my brother to clear his debts. You were nothing but a temporary dumping ground, Marcus, a walking wallet, and you were too busy trying to prove your manhood to even notice I was bleeding you dry." The silence that followed was heavy, toxic, and highly combustible. For 5 years, Vivian Pierce had made my life a living nightmare. She had relentlessly mocked my South Atlanta roots, my working-class parents, and my natural hair. She had weaponized my race against me at every turn, whispering to her wealthy friends that I was a stain on the Pierce legacy, that my blood was simply not good enough for her son. She had practically thrown a parade when Marcus discarded me for Chloe, championing this woman as the ultimate prize, the shining pale angel who would finally elevate their family to true high society status. And now that very same angel was standing in the middle of a hospital corridor, spitting on Vivian, very existence, openly mocking her race and laughing at the total destruction of her wealth. Silas, moving with the terrifying, fluid grace of a predator, subtly raised 2 fingers. The lead security guard immediately stepped forward, his massive frame easily inserting itself between Chloe and the wall. Without a single word, the guard expertly and firmly extracted the infant carrier from Chloe's arms. Chloe was too busy screaming her vile insults to even register that the baby was being moved to safety. "Secure the child down the hall," Silas murmured to the guard, his dark eyes never leaving Vivian's face. "This environment is about to become highly unsuitable." The guard nodded and swiftly walked away, carrying the crying infant out of the blast radius. The moment the baby was out of her hands, the final tether holding Vivian's fragile sanity snapped completely. The psychological break was instantaneous, violent, and absolutely spectacular to witness. The haughty, untouchable matriarch of the Pierce family, the woman who had spent decades meticulously cultivating an image of flawless, aristocratic Southern grace, vanished into thin air. With an animalistic, guttural shriek that tore from the very bottom of her lungs, Vivian lunged. She slammed into Chloe with the force of a runaway train. The impact sent both women crashing hard against the polished marble wall. Chloe let out a sharp, breathless scream of terror as Vivian manicured hands adorned with thousands of dollars in diamond rings instantly transformed into vicious claws. Vivian grabbed a massive handful of Chloe's perfectly styled blonde hair and yanked backward with terrifying, unhinged strength. "You wretched racist parasite," Vivian screamed, her voice cracking into a raw, ragged roar. "I will kill you! I will rip your face off!" Chloe shrieked in agony as several of her expensive hair extensions were violently ripped from her scalp. She flailed wildly, her designer diaper bag kicking across the floor, scattering silver pacifiers and organic formula everywhere. She managed to free one arm and raked her nails aggressively across Vivian's cheek, leaving 3 bright bleeding scratches down the older woman's perfectly powdered skin. "You crazy old hag," Chloe screeched, kicking out blindly with her expensive stiletto heels. "Get off of me!" But Vivian was entirely lost to the rage. She tackled Chloe to the ground. The two women hit the hard marble floor in a tangled, thrashing mess of tearing couture fabric, flailing limbs, and absolute unchecked savagery. Vivian's heavy multi-strand pearl necklace caught on Chloe's collar. With a loud, sharp snap, the silk thread broke, sending hundreds of expensive, luminous white pearls bouncing and scattering across the hallway like tiny, chaotic hailstones. Vivian straddled Chloe, pinning her to the tiles, and began slapping her across the face with wild, chaotic swings. Chloe screamed desperately, trying to shield her face, kicking her legs and clawing at Vivian's ruined chinchilla coat. It was a vicious, ugly, undignified street brawl. The two women who had spent their entire lives pretending to be the absolute pinnacle of high society class were now rolling around on a hospital floor, tearing at each other's clothes and screaming obscenities like cornered animals. And the best part was that the security guards did absolutely nothing to stop it. Silas stood perfectly still beside me, his hands resting casually in his pockets. He did not issue a single command to intervene. He simply let his security team stand back, their arms folded, watching the destruction play out. Above us, the small black domes of the hospital high-definition security cameras were capturing every single second of the brutal, humiliating fight. Vivian Pierce, the woman who cared more about her public image than her own soul, was currently starring in a violent, undignified spectacle that would undoubtedly be leaked to every major news outlet and socialite gossip circle in Atlanta before sunset. Her reputation was officially permanently dead. While the two women tore each other to pieces on the floor, my eyes drifted to Marcus. He had not moved to stop his mother. He had not moved to defend his wife. He was completely broken. His knees buckled and he collapsed onto the scattered pearls, sinking down until he was kneeling on the hard marble floor. His perfectly tailored suit was rumpled, his tie was askew, and his face was a portrait of total, absolute devastation. He stared blankly at the wall, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. Everything he had ever valued was gone. His massive, imaginary $50 million real estate deal was a fraud. His trust fund was empty, stolen by the woman he had abandoned me for. His mother was currently bleeding and brawling on the floor like a wild dog. And he was millions of dollars in debt to a violent criminal syndicate who had promised to take his home and his life. Marcus slowly turned his head. His bloodshot, tear-filled eyes met mine. He looked up at me from his knees, shivering, entirely emasculated and completely ruined. The arrogant, posturing alpha male who had proudly handed me divorce papers and mocked my fertility struggles was dead. In his place was a pathetic, terrified little boy begging for salvation. "Zora," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking, tears freely spilling down his cheeks. "Please, you have to help me. I did not know. I swear to God I did not know what she was doing. They took everything. If I do not pay those men by Friday, they are going to kill me. You own this hospital. You have the money. Please, Zora. I was your husband. We loved each other. You cannot just let them destroy me." I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. For years I had laid awake at night, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering why I was not enough for him. I had shed countless tears over his cruel words, his betrayal, and his complete disregard for my heart. I had believed him when he said I was small, that I was a liability, that I was unworthy of his grand elite life. Now, staring into his desperate, pleading eyes, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no lingering affection, just a cold, clinical emptiness. "You made your choice, Marcus," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady, slicing cleanly through the sounds of Vivian and Chloe screaming on the floor behind him. "You wanted a woman with the right pedigree. You wanted a woman who looked the part, who fit the racist, superficial aesthetic your mother demanded. You traded a loyal wife for a beautiful parasite because you were too weak to build your own life. And now the parasite has eaten you alive." "Zora, please," Marcus sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand toward my shoes. "I am begging you." "Do not touch me," I snapped, stepping back, my eyes flashing with a sudden lethal warning. "You do not get to invoke our marriage. You do not get to use the love I once had for you as a shield against the consequences of your own arrogant stupidity. When you threw me out, you told me I was a bad investment. You told me I had no future. Well, you were wrong, Marcus. I was the best asset you ever had, and you liquidated me to buy a counterfeit life." I looked at Silas, who gave me a slow, respectful nod. He snapped his fingers. Immediately, the 4 security guards stepped forward, expertly grabbing Vivian and Chloe by their arms and hauling the screaming, bleeding women off the floor. Chloe's dress was torn, her face scratched and red. Vivian was missing a shoe, her hair a wild, tangled bird nest, her chest heaving as she spat vile curses at her daughter-in-law. "Escort these individuals off my property," I commanded, my voice echoing with total, absolute authority. "If they resist, call the Atlanta Police Department and have them arrested for assault, battery, and criminal trespassing. And make sure they leave through the front lobby. Let everyone see exactly what the Pierce family legacy looks like." Marcus let out a guttural sob, burying his face in his hands as the guards forcefully dragged his screaming mother and his treacherous wife down the corridor. He remained on his knees, shivering violently among the scattered pearls, completely alone in the wreckage of his own making. I did not offer him a hand. I simply turned my back, walking away with Silas, leaving Marcus Pierce to drown in the absolute terrifying reality of his empty, ruined life. The visceral shock of Chloe racist venom suspended time for exactly 3 seconds. Then the true, unadulterated savagery began. Vivian let out a sound that did not even belong to a human being. It was a raw, primal shriek of a woman whose entire identity had just been incinerated. She threw herself at Chloe with renewed murderous desperation. The 2 women thrashed violently on the pristine floor, tearing at designer fabrics and clawing at exposed skin. Marcus, who had been kneeling in the scattered pearls like a broken shell of a man, suddenly slammed his hands against the floor. The sheer humiliation of watching his mother and his wife brawl like common criminals seemed to trigger a desperate final surge of his fragile ego. He scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving as he frantically tried to smooth down the wrinkled lapels of his ruined suit. He was desperately clawing for any remaining shred of his aristocratic dignity, attempting to resurrect the dominant, untouchable persona he had worn for his entire life. "Stop it!" Marcus bellowed, his voice cracking wildly as he glared at Chloe. "You are completely done, Chloe. I am divorcing you today. You can take your bastard child and get out of my sight. You will not get a single pathetic dime from the Pierce family." He turned his back on her, puffing out his chest and lifting his chin as he looked at Silas and me. He was actually trying to look down his nose at us, relying on the one safety net he believed was completely indestructible. "You think you have destroyed me, Zora?" Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with a forced, trembling arrogance. "You think buying this hospital means you have won. You are forgetting who I am. I am a Pierce. We have assets you cannot even comprehend. I am putting the Buckhead estate on the market tomorrow morning. It is an architectural landmark. It is worth $15 million in cash. I will pay off the shadow broker, I will rebuild my portfolio from scratch, and I will erase both of you from my life. You will never ever be my equal." He stood there breathing heavily, genuinely believing his grand declaration, had somehow reversed the massive power dynamic in the corridor. He believed that the ancestral Pierce mansion, the massive sprawling estate where his mother had hosted elite galas and relentlessly mocked my background, would be his ultimate salvation. Silas let out a low, dark chuckle. It was a rich, vibrating sound that completely shattered Marcus' fragile illusion of control. With a casual, almost bored flick of his wrist, Silas signaled the security team. The guards immediately stepped forward, their massive frames easily overpowering the two fighting women. They yanked Vivian and Chloe apart, dragging them up from the floor and holding them firmly against opposite walls. Vivian was panting heavily, a thin line of blood running down her scratched cheek, while Chloe sobbed hysterically, her designer dress torn at the shoulder. "That is a truly fascinating financial strategy," Marcus Silas stated, his voice a smooth, lethal baritone that commanded absolute silence. He reached inside his tailored jacket and withdrew a thick, legally bound document folded into a crisp envelope. "But as always, your execution is fundamentally flawed." Silas stepped forward and casually dropped the document. It hit the marble floor right at Marcus' feet with a heavy, definitive thud. "Let us review the fine print of your desperate attempt to save your brother-in-law. Fraudulent crypto scheme." Silas continued, looking at Marcus with clinical detachment. "When traditional banks completely rejected your loan applications, you went to an aggressive, unlicensed debt broker. But they did not hand you $2 million based on your charming personality, Marcus. They required high-value collateral, and since you had already drained the liquid cash from the family trust, you used the only substantial asset you had left." Vivian stopped struggling against the security guard. Her eyes darted to the document on the floor, a new paralyzing terror washing over her bleeding face. "You forged your mother's signature to bypass the generational trust restrictions," Silas stated, his words striking like physical blows. "You secretly mortgaged the $15 million Buckhead estate to secure a high-interest short-term cash loan. And according to this official notice of default, you missed the final balloon payment. You are exactly 90 days past due." Marcus stumbled backward, as if the document on the floor had suddenly caught fire. His face turned a ghastly, translucent shade of gray. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked wildly at his mother, whose eyes had rolled back in her head as she physically sagged against the guard, entirely unable to process that her son had secretly gambled away her ancestral home. This was my moment. The ultimate crushing finale to years of psychological torment. I stepped forward, moving smoothly past Silas. My designer heels clicked sharply against the polished marble, each sound echoing loudly in the quiet corridor, counting down the final seconds of the Pierce family dynasty. I stopped right in front of Marcus, looking down at the foreclosure notice, and then directly into his terrified, trembling eyes. "You always loved reminding me of my place, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet, lethal, and dripping with absolute authority. "You and your mother loved showing off that massive, sprawling mansion in Buckhead. You made sure I knew that a girl from the south side of Atlanta would never truly belong in a $15 million estate. You treated that house like it was a fortress protecting your superior bloodline." I tilted my head, savoring the sheer, intoxicating panic radiating from his entire body. "But here's the beautiful reality of the modern financial world." I continued, my gaze locking him in place. "Debt is a highly tradable asset. When you default on a shadow broker, they immediately sell that debt to specialized collection agencies to recoup their losses." Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes wide and unblinking. "That specific collection agency," I whispered, stepping even closer so he could hear every single syllable of his destruction, "is a heavily shielded private subsidiary of Black Diamond Vanguard." The words hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. Marcus gasped, his hands flying to his chest, as if he could physically stop his heart from tearing itself apart. "I bought your debt 3 months ago, Marcus," I stated, raising my voice so it echoed clearly down the hallway, ensuring Vivian and Chloe heard every single word. "I own the lien. I own the mortgage. I own every single brick, every crystal chandelier, and every blade of grass on that property." Vivian let out a weak, strangled moan, her knees finally giving out completely as the guard held her up by her armpits. The grand elite kingdom she had ruled with an iron fist had just been legally handed over to the very woman she despised. I did not need a lawyer, and I did not need a divorce settlement, I said, delivering the final, devastating blow. Because I knew you would eventually destroy yourself. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the foreclosure process was officially finalized by the county courts. The deed to the Buckhead estate has been legally transferred into my name. I looked at Marcus, then at Vivian, and finally at Chloe, taking in the absolute, undeniable ruin of the three people who had tried to break my spirit. "Congratulations, Marcus," I said, offering him a sharp, merciless smile. "You, your mother, and your fraudulent wife are officially homeless by next Monday morning." Marcus collapsed. He did not just drop to his knees this time, he physically crumpled his entire body, folding in on itself until he was curled on the marble floor, weeping with loud, ragged, pathetic sobs. He clutched at his hair, his mind completely broken by the inescapable reality that he had lost everything. He had no money, no home, no legacy, and no future. I turned my back on the pathetic spectacle. I did not need to say another word. The truth of my power was absolute. I walked away down the corridor, Silas falling perfectly into step beside me, leaving the shattered, weeping remains of the Pierce family to be escorted out of my hospital and into the cold, unforgiving reality of the streets. I had only taken 5 steps down the pristine corridor when a sudden, desperate scuffle broke out behind me. Survival instinct is a fascinating, degrading thing. It can take a woman who has spent 60 years meticulously cultivating the aura of an untouchable Southern aristocrat and reduce her to a feral, panicked animal in a matter of seconds. Vivian tore herself out of the security guard grip with a violent, uncoordinated jerk. The seam of her designer blouse ripped audibly, the expensive silk tearing right down the shoulder, but she did not even blink. She did not stand up to run after me. She could not. Her knees had completely given out, so she scrambled across the hard marble floor on her hands and knees. She crawled through the scattered, crushed pearls of her own broken necklace, her ruined chinchilla coat dragging heavily behind her like a dead weight. "Zora, wait. Please, Zora, wait." Her voice was no longer the haughty, condescending drawl that had tormented me for 5 years. It was a high-pitched, ragged wheeze. It was the sound of total, absolute surrender. Silas instantly pivoted, his massive frame stepping smoothly between us to intercept her, his hand reaching out to grab her by the collar. I gently placed my hand on his forearm, silently, signaling him to stop. I turned around slowly, looking down at the spectacle unfolding at my feet. Vivian crashed into my ankles. Her manicured hands, the same hands that had once pointed me toward the servant entrance during my own wedding reception, were now clutching desperately at the hem of my skirt. She looked up at me, her face a horrific mess of smeared mascara, bleeding scratches, and uncontrollable tears. Her chest heaved so violently I could hear the air rattling in her lungs. "You cannot do this," Vivian sobbed, her fingers digging frantically into the fabric of my clothes as if I were a life raft in a hurricane. "You cannot take Buckhead, Zora. It is my home. It is the Pierce family estate. I have lived there for 30 years. My entire life is in that house. Please, you have to stop this. You have to give it back to me." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical fascination. It was genuinely incredible to witness how quickly bigotry and classism evaporated the moment the bank accounts ran dry. "We are family," Vivian pleaded, the tears streaming down her ruined face and dripping onto my expensive shoes. She was shaking her head wildly, desperately trying to rewrite a decade of history in a matter of seconds. "Zora, please, you have to remember. We are family. We shared meals together. You sat at my dining table. You were my daughter-in-law. You loved my son. You cannot just throw an old woman out into the street. Have some mercy." "Nitinjadin, Zora. Remember the family bond." A sharp, humorless breath escaped my lips. The sheer, magnificent audacity of her delusion was almost poetic. "Shared meals." I repeated quietly, letting the words hang in the sterile hospital air. My eyes locked onto hers, cold and entirely void of sympathy. "Do you mean the Thanksgiving dinner, where I spent 2 days cooking for your country club friends, only for you to tell them the catering company was running late? Do you mean the family dinners, where you intentionally seated me at the far end of the table, making sure everyone knew I was the charity case your son had dragged in from the South Side? You never shared a meal with me, Vivian. You merely allowed me to eat the scraps that fell from your table while you spent hours dissecting my background, my clothes, and my worth. Vivian flinched as if I had physically struck her, but her desperation was a bottomless pit. She immediately pivoted, entirely willing to throw the one person she had championed straight into the fire to save her own skin. It was her. Vivian shrieked, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger down the hall where the guards were still restraining a sobbing Chloe. It was that white trash whore. She ruined my son. She poisoned Marcus' mind against you, Zora. I swear to God, I never wanted him to leave you. I always knew she was a snake. She manipulated him. She used her body and her fake pathetic victim routine to blind him. Vivian crawled closer, pressing her face against my legs, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her dignity. You were always the strong one, Zora. Vivian cried, her voice echoing with a sickeningly fake attempt at female solidarity. You were the smart one. I see that now. I was just trying to protect my son, but I was wrong. I was so wrong. Punish Marcus. Punish Chloe. Let her brother go to prison. They deserve it. They stole from me just as much as they stole from you. But please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Just give me the house, take the cars, take the investment portfolios, take whatever is left of the hospital shares. Just let me keep my home. I have nowhere else to go. I stood perfectly still, letting her pathetic, rambling excuses wash over me. She was utterly incapable of taking accountability. Even now, kneeling in the wreckage of her own arrogance, she was trying to construct a narrative where she was the victim. She had welcomed Chloe with open arms, celebrated the destruction of my marriage, and actively participated in the cruel, racist mockery of my very existence. And now she wanted mercy. I slowly pulled my skirt out of her desperate grip. My eyes drifted past her weeping form and landed on a small rectangular object lying discarded on the floor a few feet away. It was Vivian Vintage Limited Edition Chanel handbag. It must have been kicked away during her violent, undignified brawl with Chloe. The pristine quilted white leather was now scuffed, covered in dust, and lying pathetically among the crushed pearls and hospital dirt. I took a slow, deliberate step away from her, walking over to the discarded bag. Vivian stopped crying for a fraction of a second, her red, swollen eyes watching me with a spark of frantic, desperate hope. She probably thought my silence meant I was considering her plea. She probably believed that her tears had finally broken through my defenses, that the innate goodness she had so routinely mocked was about to save her. I bent down smoothly, the movement completely controlled, and picked up the Chanel bag by its gold chain strap. I held it up to the harsh fluorescent lights, examining the scuff marks on the expensive leather. With agonizing, meticulous slowness, I raised my other hand and gently dusted off the front of the bag. I brushed away the dirt, the grime, and the broken pieces of pearl. The simple, deliberate action was deafening in the quiet corridor. It was the ultimate display of absolute dominance. I was taking my time, entirely unfazed by her suffering, treating her most prized material possession with more care and attention than I was giving her tears. I turned back to Vivian, who was still kneeling on the floor, watching me with bated breath, her hands clasped together in silent prayer. I walked back to her. She looked up at me, a pathetic, trembling smile trying to form on her bleeding, scratched face. Slowly, I lowered my hands and placed the dusted, pristine Chanel bag directly into her shaking palms. Her fingers instinctively curled around the expensive leather, clutching it to her chest like a shield. Then I leaned down. I closed the distance between us until my face was only inches from hers. I could smell the stale sweat, the expensive perfume, and the sharp metallic tang of absolute unfiltered fear rolling off her skin. I tilted my head, putting my lips right next to her ear, preparing to deliver the final, inescapable sentence. Family bond. I breathed my voice, a quiet, lethal hiss that made her physically shudder. Is that what we are calling it now? Because I vividly remember standing in your grand vaulted living room 3 years ago. I was drowning. I begged you for a simple microloan to save my struggling event planning startup. It was a fraction of what you casually threw away on weekly floral arrangements. Do you remember what you told me as you sipped your vintage champagne, Vivian? Vivian shook her head frantically, fresh tears carving paths through the ruined makeup on her cheeks, completely unable to meet my eyes. You looked right through me, I continued, my words slicing through the heavy air. And you said trash belongs exactly where it came from, with the rest of the trash. I pulled back, standing to my full height, as I looked down at the shattered matriarch of the Pierce dynasty. So today, Vivian, I am simply returning your profound wisdom, I said, my voice ringing with total unshakable finality. Do not let me see trash cluttering the entrance of my hospital ever again. From the floor, Marcus let out a pathetic, desperate gasp. Seeing his mother utterly destroyed, he realized his last invisible shield was gone. He scrambled forward on his knees, his hands reaching out as if to grab my skirt again, though he stopped just short, terrified of the security guards looming nearby. Zora, baby, please! Marcus begged, his voice cracking as he looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. He was actually trying to use the same cheap, manipulative, romantic lines that used to keep me trapped. We can fix this. I was blind, I know that now, but you opened my eyes. You are the only woman who ever truly understood me. We built a life together. Once we can rebuild it. I love you, Zora. I always have. Just give me one more chance to prove I can be the man you deserve. Before I could even formulate a response to his nauseating performance, Silas moved. He stepped seamlessly to my side and wrapped a strong, possessive arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his tailored suit. The gesture was effortless, deeply intimate, and served as an absolute, undeniable wall between my new life and the wreckage of my past. Our legal team will personally deliver the formal eviction notice at exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning. Silas stated, his voice a cold, flat blade that instantly silenced Marcus, pathetic whimpering. Enjoy your final weekend sleeping in your precious generational bed, Marcus. Because after that you belong to the streets. Silas did not wait for a response, nor did he offer Marcus a single second to process the absolute finality of his ruin. He simply turned to me and offered his arm with a slight respectful inclination of his head. I slipped my hand through the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid, reassuring warmth of his presence grounding me. Without a single glance back at the shattered, pathetic remnants of the Pierce dynasty, we turned our backs and walked away. Our footsteps fell in perfect synchronized rhythm against the marble tiles, a steady, triumphant drumbeat leading us away from the toxic wasteland I had finally conquered. The moment we turned away, the polished corridor behind us erupted into a vicious, chaotic cacophony. The thin, fragile truce between the three of them shattered instantly. Vivian began shrieking with unhinged fury, her voice raw and cracking, as she violently cursed Chloe for destroying her social empire. Chloe screamed right back, her high-pitched wails echoing harshly off the walls as she blamed Marcus for being a weak, useless fraud who had lied about his wealth. And Marcus, trapped on the floor between the two venomous women who had drained his life away, could only sob loudly, his pathetic, broken apologies entirely drowned out by their vicious hatred. They were turning on each other like starving rabid animals, locked in a cage, tearing into whatever flesh was left. As Silas and I moved further down the long, pristine hallway, the ugly, desperate sounds of their mutual destruction began to fade. The screaming and crying echoed behind us, growing smaller and more insignificant, with every step sounding exactly like a cheap, poorly written tragicomedy playing out to an empty theater. Ahead of us, the massive floor-to-ceiling glass doors of the hospital entrance bathed the main lobby in brilliant golden morning sunlight. The contrast was breathtaking. Behind us lay the dark, suffocating misery of a family drowning in their own lies, trapped in the cold, shadowed ruins of their crushing debt. But ahead, the world was bright open and entirely mine. We stepped out of the heavy, sterile shadows of the corridor and walked directly into the warm, embracing light of the sun. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the fresh air, smiling, as I left the darkness and the ruined legacy of the Pierce family permanently behind me. The brilliant, blinding sunlight of that hospital morning suddenly flashes and shifts, melting smoothly into the warm, amber glow of my present-day living room. I sit comfortably in my plush leather armchair, the quiet serenity of my own home wrapping around me. I raise my crystal glass, the ice clinking softly, and take one final satisfying sip of my aged bourbon. They genuinely believed that stripping away my place in their world would completely break me. They were so blinded by their own supreme entitlement that they did not realize they had just violently torn down the only protective barrier, hiding the absolute rot at the core of their entire family. For years, I was the one quietly paying off their high-interest credit cards. I was the one constantly shifting my own personal business funds to cover the gaping financial holes Marcus endlessly dug for himself. Without my silent, uncredited labor, keeping their sinking ship afloat, the total collapse of the Pierce Empire was never just a possibility. It was an inevitable mathematical guarantee. Today, reality has settled the score exactly as it should. Marcus spends his long days pushing a heavy mop bucket. He is now a janitorial cleaner working at the exact same luxury apartment complex he once publicly ridiculed for housing the working class. Chloe is currently out on bail facing multiple federal court dates and serious prison time for her active role as a co-conspirator in her brother's massive wire fraud scheme. And Vivian, the grand untouchable matriarch, suffered the ultimate humiliating societal execution. She was formally and publicly stripped of her lifetime membership from the elite Jack and Jill Club due to her highly publicized catastrophic bankruptcy. The sweetest, most intoxicating revenge is never getting your own hands dirty to destroy the people who hurt you. It is standing comfortably at the absolute peak of your own success, looking down and watching them willingly burn each other to the ground. They were completely incinerated by nothing but their own toxic greed and blinding arrogance. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. Please always remember this one undeniable truth. Your inherent value is never ever determined by the mouths of those who are too small to comprehend your worth. The screen slowly fades to a deep, quiet black.